Moments. That's something that I pretty much eat, drink, sleep 24/7. Living a moment, conceptualizing a moment, creating the moment, recreating the moment, sharing the moment. Those pieces of celluloid you have, those are all moments. Those are many, many moments. As a visual artist in a time-based medium like cinema, you're always racking your brain to try and think of an idea that might be worthy of presenting to a mass audience. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Well, actually, hey, that's even better. Oh, cool, thanks. Much better. All right. The last Picacho I did way back when, I did a similar thing. I just took the mic off like this. Oh, cool. All right. Now I'm flexible because I can't stand still. A lot of what I do in terms of making art, and I have to stress making art, photography and filmmaking, those are the mediums that I work with. I do traditional drawing as well. I paint a little bit, not that well, but I still paint. But I'm more or less a traditionalist in terms of creating stuff. And since the topic and the theme is moments, I guess we can sort of dwell upon that in terms of the motivations of what I do and why I do things for moments and everything, because I am a filmmaker, but I'm not your traditional filmmaker. Living and working in the city of Cleveland all these years has been a phenomenal boost in me doing things and challenging myself and all that, whereas I could have gone to New York or LA, which people have criticized me for not doing that sooner, but I have a mom here. She's 91 years old, and ever since my dad passed away, which will be 30 years this coming October, I promised I wouldn't leave her by herself, which is why I got out of the military. And I figured, well, here's a chance for me to see if I can make something happen in a city like Cleveland, which is definitely a great place for hands-on labor. We have all the greatest in, construction, salt, steel mills. We're all about that. We're a blue-collar city, and we're all about getting our hands dirty. I mean, outside my studio, which is why I didn't get much sleep this morning or this entire week, they're tearing up something in the side street on 19th Street, and there's a big pile driver there, and there's cones, and these construction workers show up there every morning. They've been showing up there since this past Friday every morning, making noises, yelling, swearing, spitting, laughing. I hear the machines going, and I'm kicking myself because it would have made great audio, especially Foley audio, especially the machines going and all that. But I'm thinking, man, it doesn't get any better than this. This is who we are. This is what we are. And in that sense, that goes back to the whole idea of why I do things the way I do, because I'm all about hands-on. I'm all about physically making things. And any good artist here, whether they do jewelry or enameling or ceramics or paper making, whatever, traditional printmaking, it's all about working with your hands. When I make my films, I like using my hands. The problem is the idea is right there, and you want to capture that moment and make it happen right there in terms of lighting it and blocking it, setting it up, getting the actors to understand what they're doing, why they're doing, and all this stuff, even though it may not make any sense, but you're trying to capture these elements of that. And I'm still thinking in terms of like these construction workers, we got to tear it down and build it up and retranslate that so people can see it. Whether they get it or not, at that point in time, it doesn't really matter. We just want to put it out there. And to me, that's the fun part of making films. That's the fun part of actually conceptualizing something that really can be irrelevant, as a fly crying on a fly crawling on a sugary table sprinkled with sugar, or somebody knocking on someone's window because they left their keys and they couldn't get in their front door. I'm just taking something out of the air when I say these things. You should be able to take any element of anything, whether it's a 1 second moment or a 10-second moment or an hour moment. There are hour moments, believe it or not, and retranslate that. So you're taking all these elements and you're just making it something that someone's going to have to sit down and they're going to have to either accept it for what it is or just discard it as being, okay, this is wasting my time looking at your watch or whatever. So that's what it's all about. I like making stuff. I like putting things out there, and I like sharing it. I'm not really a storyteller per se, but more or less a way of expressing an emotion or an idea behind that emotion, which is what's common now in social media. But going back to what I was saying earlier about the hands-on thing, there's a stimulation behind that. I know it sounds kind of weird, but when I make my films, preferably, I like to use traditional methods. And in this sense, I just noticed they had these little booklets up there, little white pages, like a little sketchbook, whatever, swatch book, whatever. I have a ton of these in my studio, not this particular book, but I have many, many books like these. And they're just basically little sketchbooks or notebooks or notepads, whatever. When I start making a film or an idea, I'll just start scribbling in one of these and I'll sketch it out almost like a thumbnail sketch, and it eventually becomes like a storyboard, and then from there it becomes into more like a template for what I'm gonna knock out. I still do this stuff, and I don't draw that well, but I am really, really into just keeping bare essentials on hand to create something. It's paramount to do that. I have to do that. I'm a visual person, I think visually, and granted, I will write out information about what this is about or what the purpose and the motivation behind it is, but even still, there has to be something there visually. So this is something that just started as a kid. I just, we have two eyes, you see things, you see light. Light is the beginning and the ending of everything that's worthwhile. And that light falls on something. That object has lights and darks, middle tone values, all these different things, these different highlights, backlight, color, what texture, what do you want to call it? We can go all over the map here. These things trigger something. This is something that I noticed as a kid, and it just sort of stayed with me. Those things lead to other things, other ideas, other emotions, other themes, who knows what. It's just all about just translating it and taking it on that path that's going to finally reach its destination. So, why do I do what I do? That's really a hard question to answer because when you think about it, and this touches into the film that I'm working on, Paper Shadows, which we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're here, we're born, we're brought into this world. We have to pretty much endure whatever period of time that we're here. So what do? You grow up, you age, get educated, you get a job, you get married, have kids, you provide for them, and you try to keep a balance, so to speak. So that's something that we all share universally. It's just the normal, we had no choice, we're here. So I just like making things, but I also want to try and inspire people, especially young people, because I teach part-time, all the benefits of being who you are, being proud of who you are, being proud of your family, your heritage, the whole 9 yards, all the things that we were taught to, appreciate growing up in this world. With social media and everything now as it is, and how everybody is so locked into their phones or whatnot, everybody has their own conclusions, everybody is so judgmental now, and everybody seems to be so critical of other people and other beliefs and other philosophical aspects of things, or as far as who's liberal and who's conservative, all these things. So everybody wants to express their opinion. All of a sudden, everybody wants to, instead of feeling good about themselves, they want to judge everybody else. And we're leading into this sort of different aspect of being a living, breathing person on planet Earth in the 21st century. Now, my friends, and who are a few of them are in here right now, they've heard me complain about why things suck right now. I'm going to keep it PG, don't worry. But a lot of it is so many people feel that now they have the means to say what they want to say, and they're going to say it whether you like it or not, screw you. Well, that's fine, cool. As a kid, I knew that film was a key element towards society. Before anything else in terms of modern media, there was cinema. I mean, before that, of course, we had radio and we had other aspects of entertainment and all that stuff. But when film came about, there was this whole new way of saying something that was going to affect a large mass of people in the populations. And whether it was used for entertainment or for educational or for propaganda, regardless, it was there and it's not going anywhere. Moving pictures. A big image in a dark room, and these images say things to you that's going to draw a conclusion about who you are, what you want, who you want, whatever, It's like literally the ultimate and communal celebration of illusion, hallucination, magic, whatnot, but at the same time, reaching out to everybody's psyche, so to speak. So as a kid, that was sort of presented as this is what you could possibly be involved with in terms of utilizing your skills, because at the time growing up, I just wanted to make B horror films or B monster movies. I still want to do B monster movies. But when I did the research in high school about what these films stood for, because I really just was fascinated by how a lot of these filmmakers and writers and storytellers, whatever you want to call them, they all had a hidden agenda, but they used other genres to sort of express this. And if you look back at all the classic B horror films or sci-fi movies, yeah, they were all basically, you know, just talking about, say, the McCarthy era, or they were probably talking about communism. They were probably, who knows? There's just all these things that they were talking about. So it took me a few years to sort of get a grip on that. And then my interest in that genre sort of tapered off a bit, even though I still have a love for it. I still do. I started exploring other aspects of telling a story, and not really so much telling a story, but expressing an idea without a story and keeping it short. Which is why I started dabbling in experimental cinema. The other reason why I dabbled with that too was going back to the whole aspect of working with my hands. I wanted to see what you could do with the bare essentials, because coming up back in the early 80s, I realized you have to adapt to limitations, because when you don't have any money, you don't have a crew, you don't have a budget, are you going to let that hold you back? And I know many people that have let them. They use it as an excuse, and they were like, oh, I want to do this, but I don't have that, so I'm not going to do that. It's like, well, that's one way of looking at it, but why not try another avenue? So I started exploring other aspects of making films. And without any formal guidance or education, I discovered the ways of taking a piece of celluloid, which like what you guys have, and you could take it and you could literally dip it in water and take a blunt pencil or a inkless pen, and scratch on the emulsion. There's two sides. The one side is the base side, which is basically plastic acetate. The other side is the actual emulsion, which is like the silver gelatin. If you hold it up, you can see that. And I would literally just start taking film that was either overexposed, underexposed, or whatnot. My dad had a lot of home movies, and for every good roll of film, there was always these rolls that were just black or it was dark or whatever. So I would take those rolls of film and I would scratch on them, and I'm like, hey, this is cool. And this is back when I was in 6th, 7th grade, I started doing this. I think it was 6th grade. And I started experimenting with that. I mean, granted, I was doing the other little stuff too, doing little stop motion with the 8mm movie camera, but this was another way of actually doing something really unique. At this time, I didn't know who Stan Brakhage was. Who knows who Stan Brakhage is? Nobody knows who Stan Brakhage is? Raise your hand if you know. Okay, all right, well, Stan Brakhage, who knows who Norman McLaren is? Lynn Lai, who knows who he is? Harry Smith, okay, anyway. These were men, or just a handful of filmmakers, I should say, that made a name for themselves by painting and scratching on film. And some of their films were definitely out there and really, really psychedelic. And some of them were really, really into expressing issues, very political. McLaren especially was very political with what he did. And I was thinking, wow, there's a way you can actually make a film and not use a camera and all that. So as primitive as that was, that intrigued me as a kid. On top of that, the whole idea of taking images that were unrelated from like other pieces of film that were probably used for like educational purposes or whatnot. You can take those pieces of film, cut them up, manipulate them, splice them together, and just say things. So as a kid, once again, I had no idea of montage. I didn't know who Sergei Eisenstein was. Who knows who Eisenstein is? Anybody? Battleship Potemkin? Yeah, you know, okay. So people like that. And he's just one example. There's many other filmmakers that I've seen. So keep in mind, young black kid in the hood, in the Huff area, doing crazy little experimental films. Along with doing that, my dad gave me a tape recorder, and I would take that recorder. This was like back in the day, back in the early 70s when this was going on. And just for fun, I was recording audio off the TV. I would have the microphone on the TV speaker. Who's done this as a kid? You've all done this, yeah. And I used to record a wide variety of commercials or TV show intros or outros. If there's like some background music being used for a certain scene in a TV show that I like, I would record that. I would take those audio cassettes. These are those cassettes you would buy like three pack for like $1. Those Sertron tapes, remember those back then? I would do that, And then I would take those tapes and I would do these weird little loops, not knowing what I was doing, but I was making these weird little dubs and just doing weird stuff like that. Then I would take those tapes and play them to these little films I was making. Keep in mind, I had no formal guidance for any of this. This was just me screwing around. And my parents are like, oh, that's cute. Look at Bobby. He's playing with his little recorder, his little movies, you know, I was off the streets. I was not getting into trouble. They were more concerned about me being close by where they could see me, which was a good thing, but it was kind of sucky because my parents were overprotective, but that was their way of keeping an eye on me. But they didn't take any of that seriously. They just liked the fact that I was doing something constructive. My dad even more so, because he just had this thing about films and photography that he just really appreciated also. But the fact that his little boy was doing this stuff was even more intriguing. But all that would lead to me thinking, well, I did that as a kid, and I was making a lot of nonsense. What if I actually sat down and scripted something and made something that said something? So let me just go forward here. You know who that guy is. So what happened was this. After being in the military, I did some time in the service, and my father passed away. I had a humanitarian discharge. I decided I was going to try pursuing filmmaking as an art form as well as a professional skill. Now, prior to being in the military, I was at the Cleveland Institute of Art for a year. And prior to that, I went to the Cleveland School of the Arts. From high school, School of the Arts, Cleveland Institute of Art, joined the military. Then I went back to school, went to Cleveland State, went to Ohio School of Broadcast Technique, all that stuff. But I still had this passion to want to make something and think of moments and ideas that I could just go crazy with. Not so much for the sake of doing it, but for exercise. It was like a mental exercise as well as a physical exercise, a discipline aspect too also. So I wanted to just take all these things that I learned as a kid with very little guidance and just explore. And in many ways, I opened up things that I think for lack of a better word, I saw the light. I guess you could say that's a bad pun. I did see the light, and it wasn't until that I started using this method. More crazy shots of me. I use these methods to make several short experimental films that were nothing special, but at the same time, they were something very unique. This film here, if you guys can see that, that was a short that I did. Actually, it was completed in 1992. It played at the Cinematheque. And then I went back and I did a few tweaks on it, and then it got a second screening, of the first official formal screening actually, was at the Cleveland International Film Festival in March of '93. The whole purpose of this film was I just wanted to express the idea of the X symbol, which was pretty much a big issue in the early 90s with what was going on. I mean, we see what's been happening lately with police brutality and all that stuff. Well, as some of you may already have guessed, yeah, this has been going on forever. But as far as being documented, the Rodney King incident was one of the first major presented aspects of police brutality by means of a hidden video camera. And of course, that would lead to many people wanting to get really radical and extreme. This is long before Black Lives Matter. This was, everybody just decided we're going to get militant. And not so much militant, but we just want to be aware, and we're going to stand up, and we're going to let people know that, you know, hey. And of course, Hollywood jumps on board with this as well, and particularly Spike Lee, who I still admire and respect. He was one of my biggest heroes. Now, well. And I knew something was going to happen that was going to just trigger this tidal wave of people being a weekend militant, I called it back then. And so I had an idea about the Malcolm X symbol. And within a month after my prediction, he was making this film on Malcolm X, and he cast Denzel Washington, and I'm thinking, oh. And there were other films about Malcolm X before this film that nobody even remembers, mainly documentaries, but there were several films where I had other actors depicting him. So I decided, let me just do something and just address this, because along with scratching on film and everything, I like playing with words and text. And this film was an exercise in manipulating words and text on actual celluloid. I would take, you guys should know the traditional little rub-on letters you would take, and I actually did that. I actually would take that and put it actually on the actual frames. And if there was like a slight moment in the film where you would see archival footage, you would see words and text dancing across the screen and all that stuff. So it was like doing flipbook animation on actual film. This was shot on 16 millimeter, and it was definitely a task. It took me 8.5 months to make, but it was an eye-opener because it just showed that, yeah, I could actually pull something off for less than $1,000. This film cost me, I think, like $875 to make total, $875. And surprisingly, a lot of people were really intrigued by it. Whether they agreed with it or not, the message that was sort of up in the air. It played at a bunch of venues. In particular, it played at the New York Underground Film Festival, which, have you guys heard of that festival? No? See, nobody knows about it now. Back in the 90s, since there was this boom in independent filmmaking all of a sudden, another alternative was evolving out of that because independent films was being seen as something that was for the Sundance crowd and the Slam Dance crowd and all that. But there was another group of filmmakers that wanted to highlight other filmmakers that were not part of that whole entity. So the New York Underground Film Festival happened, and a guy named Todd Phillips and Andrew Gerlin started. Who knows who Todd Phillips is?